G'day, Dave here, and I live on the east coast of Australia, a little town called Bonny Hills. As I look out, I can see the water, the waves, not far from the city of Port Macquarie. And we've noticed that there's a number of different activities, sports that captivate people in this part of the world. One of them is Nippers. Nippers is a surf lifesaving program for young kids. You watch them learning to do surf lifesaving. They're going out on boards, they're swimming in the sea, they're running up and down on the beach. And they often are involved in competition where they've got to run about 50 metres and grab a stick. And the one who gets the stick then stays in and the next one has a go. It's quite quick. By contrast, there's another event that happens once a year. It's the Australian Ironman. In the Ironman, they swim over 3 kilometres, they ride 180 kilometres, and then they run a marathon, 42 kilometres. And I can tell you what, there's a big difference between the two things. For the little kids to run 50 metres along the beach and grab a stick, to the people who get up at 6 a.m. in the morning and are still competing at 10 o'clock at night. Let me ask you this, which one is the Christian life more like? Well, it's pretty obvious, isn't it? The Christian life is a marathon. It's an ultra marathon. It's an Ironman event. And as such, we're encouraged to persevere. And James is writing to Christians so that they will persevere. Times can be tough. There can be opposition. There can be persecution. There can just be the struggles and difficulties of living in this world. And James is encouraging us to persevere, to keep going. Look at what he has to say. We'll pick it up in chapter 5 and verse 7. Be patient then, brothers and sisters, until the Lord's coming. See how the farmer waits for the land to yield its valuable crop, patiently waiting for the autumn and the spring rains. You too, be patient and stand firm, because the Lord's coming is near. Don't grumble against one another, brothers and sisters, or you will be judged. The judge is standing at the door. Brothers and sisters, as an example of patience in the face of suffering, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. As you know, we count as blessed those who have persevered. You've heard of Job's perseverance and have seen what the Lord finally brought about. The Lord is full of compassion and mercy. Above all, my brothers and sisters, do not swear, not by heaven or by earth or by anything else. All you need to say is a simple yes or no. Otherwise, you will be condemned. Now, overall, you see the word perseverance coming up again and again. James is writing that we might keep going for the long haul, and he illustrates this with the picture of a farmer. He plants the seed, and he just has to wait until the rains come. In the Middle East, the rains would typically come in spring and in autumn, and there wasn't much you could do in between. You were completely dependent upon God, and you had to wait for these things to happen. And so he's saying we too need to have that level of patience, to realise that the end is not yet, and there will be tough times to come, but to persevere as we wait. And as we persevere, to do that patiently and to be standing firm, to be guarding our hearts, because God's coming is near. The Lord is near. Jesus will return. And so we need to be prepared for him. And the great danger is that we can be distracted by the threats around about us, distracted by the difficulties of living this life, distracted by the conflicts we can experience with brothers and sisters. Look at verse 9. He says, don't grumble against one another, brothers and sisters, or you will be judged, and the judge is standing at the door. Friends, we live in the light of the end. The end is coming, but it's not yet. So we need to be patient, to persevere, not to be grumbling or complaining or arguing, not to be fighting with one another, but to be encouraging each other and persevering until the end. He gives the example of the prophets. The prophets were well known for facing opposition. I mean, not surprisingly, they would call people to return to the ways of God. And in doing that, they'd keep pointing out where people were failing, a fairly unpopular calling. And so they faced all kinds of opposition, some of it very close to the bone, and some of them lost their lives as they were serving God. And of course, the standout amongst these people is Job, and his perseverance is highlighted. And if I can take you back to the book of Job, Just give you a little insight into what this man went through. If you don't know much about him, there's a whole book, 42 chapters devoted to Job in the Old Testament. I'm just going to read you from the opening chapter, from verse 13. One day, when Job's sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the oldest brother's house, a messenger came to Job and said, "The oxen were ploughing and the donkeys were grazing nearby, and the Sabaeans attacked and made off with them. They put the servants to the sword, and I'm the only one who has escaped to tell you." While he was still speaking, another messenger came and said, "The fire of God fell from the heavens and burned up the sheep and the servants, and I'm the only one who has escaped to tell you." While he was still speaking, another messenger came and said, "The Chaldeans formed 3 raiding parties and swept down on your camels and made off with them. They put the servants to the sword, and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you." And while he was still speaking, yet another messenger came and said, "Your sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the older brother's house, when suddenly a mighty wind swept in from the desert and struck the 4 corners of the house. It collapsed on them, and they are dead, and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you." It's a catastrophic scene, isn't it? Messenger after messenger, tragedy after tragedy. Even the man's family end up being killed. Well, you can read a lot more about the circumstances of Job's life and how he deals with it, and the various friends who come and give him advice and make suggestions, and in the end don't really know what they're talking about. Job perseveres in the face of suffering. Even when his whole family and livelihood are taken away from him, he continues to keep his trust in God. It's not easy. It's not without questions. It's not that he doesn't face doubts and struggles and temptations. He faces all of that big time. But he keeps focused upon God, and he is the example for us to do the same, to keep focused on God and to remember that God will bring about what he has promised, for he's a God of compassion and a God of mercy. And then finally in verse 12, "Above all, my brothers and sisters, don't swear by heaven or by earth or by anything else. No, just keep your yes, yes, and your no, no. Otherwise you'll be condemned." It's kind of strange, this verse. Many commentators seem to think that it's just an isolated saying that has come from Jesus, where he spoke about making your yes, yes, and your no, no. But as you look at this in the context of James, I think it fits well in this passage. For we are encouraged to persevere in focusing upon God and not to be double-minded, not to be trying to have a foot in both camps, the camp of God and faithfully persevering in the face of suffering, and the camp of me, trying to make my life more comfortable and doing what I want, keeping myself safe, having my own comforts, looking and trying to be just like the wealthy who seem to do so well without God. Now, you can't have a foot in both camp. And he's reminded us previously of what's going to happen to the wealthy who do not know God. No, we are to be persevering with our yes, yes, and our no, no. We're to be straightforward. We're to be honest, people of integrity, not double-minded. Friends, let me encourage you to persevere. God has promised that he will send Jesus. There's an end in store. But we need to keep going. Keep our eyes fixed upon our Saviour.